have to be brought down to 3%. Of course, the IMO has a goal of 50%. Similarly, ICAO has a goal of 50% emissions reduction by 2050. So that's a long-term goal. But I think we are in a situation where these two sectors will have to act much faster than that. So with this challenge, let me first turn to Captain Prashant Widge. He represents Maersk, and he brings in a lot of experience from the field. So, Captain Widge, if you can tell me, does the international shipping industry look at green hydrogen as a solution? And what kind of policy and regulatory framework is needed to create a level playing field for the green hydrogen adoption by the shipping sector? And last but not the least, are there any constraints in building the supply chain or infrastructure for supplying green hydrogen to the shipping industries?
Thank you very much for a pertinent question. There are a few of those coming together, but by and large, the answer is yes. The global shipping does look at hydrogen and its derivatives as a solution to decarbonize shipping. Let me start with actually AP Moller Maersk, and we are a transport and logistics integrator where we cover a big part of ocean and shipping, followed with logistics and terminals. That's really our business. We are in 130 countries and then have 100,000 employees globally. But just to get straight into the background of climate change and the issue around it, we believe, to the point that was mentioned, we are a part of the problem as Maersk, and we take leadership in then trying to find solutions. In 2020, we actually placed the first order for a dual fuel methanol vessel. And last year, and we had the courtesy with Nair also being there for the name giving. In last year, September, we had the first dual fuel green methanol vessel delivered with name giving in Copenhagen. Why I talk about this is because gone are the days of having one single fuel approach based on fossil. As Maersk, we believe that we are agnostic of fuels. There will be multiple pathways. And that goes to the point of the question that while we are looking at green methanol, we decided to do that because the technology was available and we wanted to deploy that in real time rather than trying to wait for a silver bullet green fuel, which, to be honest, will continue to be looked at. We have 5 vessels in water on green methanol. We have 20 more in the new building order book. Last month, we've ordered another 50 to 60 vessels owned and chartered to be delivered by the end of the decade. And there is where we are actually migrating from having some of those on methanol, but we are also looking at bio-LNG. And while we do that, we are also pioneering the testing of ammonia engines. We know that ammonia is also a potential fuel, and we have been carrying, and in fact, I have been carrying during my sailing days, green ammonia, or rather ammonia on vessels in a cryogenic condition. So it just goes on to say that we will continue to look at all of these things, but there are a bunch of challenges. And the elephant in the room at the moment is the lack of regulatory framework. And that again goes back to the moderator question on where are the challenges. When we talk about the regulatory framework, there is actually a lack of it, but there's a huge opportunity here with the International Maritime Organization that leads the regulatory framework being developed, including India playing a key role in these meetings at London. We expect that they are going ahead and working on mechanisms that could actually make this possible. And what they are then looking at doing is that there is a certain gap in pricing between fossil fuel and green fuel. We all know about it. And there has to be a way that an incentive mechanism is put in place. A net zero fund is created where those who are embracing green fuels continue to be getting a certain allocation towards bridging the price gap, and those who are laggards in the fossil journey are then actually contributing to a fund. When we do this, it's also not just about ship owners and shipping. It's very important to also remember, and which is what the World Shipping Council, which has 90% of liner shipping industry, they actually have proposed a mechanism, the green balance mechanism, by virtue of which there is a clear fund that is being allocated to developing countries, because there is huge infrastructure, which is the next big challenge that I'm alluding to, which needs to then be built. And that is where India has a huge opportunity. In our global overview, India is one of the most attractive locations to produce green methanol. We have the lowest cost of renewable energy. We are clearly the ones who are having the leadership with huge focus on hydrogen. And here we are at this great conference, including what is coming up next week. And at the same time, because we are an agra country, we have a lot of biomass. There is a challenge on aggregating it and so on, but there is a clear roadmap in that regard. So together with MNRE, who's already done some great leadership in aggregating demand for hydrogen and ammonia, we are in conversations with them to actually play a role in aggregating the demand for green methanol for the shipping industry. And as Maersk, we would be potentially one of the off-takers for that. And while we do that, we would also want to then look at how can Ministry of Port Shipping Waterways, which is again doing path-breaking stuff in setting up green hydrogen hubs, and then 3 of them that have already been touched upon, how can they then actually come together in building the infrastructure for storage and bunkering of green methanol and other potential fuels in the years to come. So that's basically for me to give you a essence of where we are, what we do, how are we going about doing that. And I'll maybe pass it back to you to have a follow-up in due course.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Captain Widge. I'm sorry. It's quite clear that while the government of India has put all its might behind a green hydrogen mission, and that appears to be the future forward. I mean, Mr. Captain Widge is saying that he's looking at, the shipping industry is looking at perhaps all derivatives of green hydrogen as possible basket of solutions. And then they do look forward to some regulatory signals, both in terms of regulation as well as aggregation of demand. And that can happen only with regulatory push. So thank you very much for this message. Before I come to you, Mr. Nair, I would like to go to the scientist here, Dr. Anil Kumar Sinha. He is a very senior scientist with IIP. Before we come to other practitioners in the field, I would like to understand from you if can give us a sense what role hydrogen can play in the entire process of decarbonization of the aviation and the shipping industry, and what measures are required to create the adequate and appropriate supply chain for production, distribution, storage, and logistics of green hydrogen. And if you can give us some information about what role IIP is playing in this, it will be good for the audience here.
Yeah, thank you very much for this opportunity. I think I have a few slides if we can show that just to set the context, otherwise I will continue without them. So I just put this slide for the purpose about as such using hydrogen for shipping or even for aircrafts, it holds very limited possibilities because it can be used only for smaller ships or maybe for smaller aircrafts. So, but for shipping and for aviation sector, we have to look at the liquid fuels. So within these liquid fuel options, I think the bridge between the shipping and aviation is that some of the fuels are maybe of similar nature, like methanol can be used in shipping as well as it can become a precursor for making aviation fuel. So what I have showed in this slide that mostly what are the limitations or challenges with the hydrogen. Like even though we say that hydrogen can be used, but when we look at this slide and these 3 options I have shown as the synthetic fuel or the so-called power to liquid pathway for making hydrocarbons that can be used in mostly for aviation, but they could also be used in the shipping also in the form of diesel. And if you look at the cost of hydrogen, if you see the red portion there, so the cost of hydrogen, if it goes very high today as it stands today, the cost of this if we add the cost of the carbon to it, and we use the CO2 conversion pathway to make synthetic fuels. So the advantage of this pathway is that we are using not only reducing the CO2 to meet the net zero goals, plus we are using the renewable hydrogen. So that is the most promising pathway. So today power to liquid pathway is the most promising pathway to make fuels. But if we look at the other two options, like the other is the Fischer-Tropsch pathway or the pathway which makes methanol, and where we are talking about the methanol, making methanol using hydrogen. So overall conversion efficiencies are better, and if you can see, most of it is blue. That means it can, when we look at the economics of the process, it can be competitive with your existing fossil fuel. If we can improve overall the reduce the cost of the feedstock as well as reduce the cost of hydrogen. So what is the main message from this? That direct hydrogen usage is not mostly applicable for aircraft or for shipping, and it is more towards making liquid fuel. But and when we talk about liquid fuel, we are basically continuously consuming the hydrogen produced from renewable feedstocks. So the storage side, the cost involved with the storage of hydrogen is done away with. So it reduces the overall cost of making these liquid fuels. But the most prevalent pathway or the most common pathway which has been followed today is the hydroprocessing pathway. That also uses hydrogen. So today, most of the aviation fuel which is made by HEFA pathway uses hydrogen, which is not renewable. So this fuel is only 80% carbon neutral. But if we are able to use renewable hydrogen, then it becomes 100% carbon neutral. It helps in meeting the net zero CO2 emission requirement. But the only penalty in that case that the cost of this fuel becomes very high. So overall, the challenge here is that it is not difficult to make hydrogen, but what is the challenging is the how economical it can be. So I think I have covered most of the things here. So what I want to convey in this slide, that all the fuels mostly used in shipping and also in aviation have the mostly common in terms of the type of fuel. Like if we are talking, except for ammonia, ammonia is the only fuel probably it is can be used for the shipping. But other than that, if we are using the conversion of use of methanol, or converting methanol to higher hydrocarbons, or even if we can consider making alcohol and converting alcohol to higher hydrocarbons, or using biomass gasification, all these processes require hydrogen. So if we are thinking of using renewable hydrogen, we have to look at the economics of the process. And so I think I have covered most of the questions that you have put. So this is something which I want to emphasize more again, that what is the advantage when we are go to the power to liquid pathway. So we are not only using renewable hydrogen, we are, if we are able to capture CO2, that is air capture of CO2, atmospheric CO2, or it is CO2 which is from most of the point sources like from steel industry or even from power industry. So that CO2, if it can be captured, but of course there is a cost of capture of that hydrogen. And when we add that cost of capture to of CO2 along with the production cost of hydrogen, it becomes nearly more than 3 or 4 times at least more expensive than your normal pathway for making aviation fuel. So with these few remarks, I think I have covered most of the issues or challenges that are involved with the use of hydrogen, and especially renewable hydrogen. And along with that, if we think of using CO2 as a net CO2 mitigating pathway for making liquid hydrocarbons.
Thank you, Mr. Sinha, for indicating the technological preference of the IIP as far as the future fuels are concerned for these two sectors. the e-fuels you have referred to as the future. That's quite significant. So with this, let me now turn to Mr. Madhu Nair, who is the CMD of Cochin Shipyard Limited. And um, to him, I would request to give us a sense of what the government of India and is doing to promote the adoption of green hydrogen in shipping sector in particular, and again the regulatory gaps, if there are any system gaps in this system which need to be filled, and particularly the initiatives taken by CSL to promote green shipping in the shipping sector. And are there any opportunities for international collaboration here?
Thank you, Dr. Rashmi. See, at the outset, I say like I second what Mr. Prashant was mentioning about the whole question whether hydrogen and its derivatives would be the future. It looks like at this stage, it looks like. But one thing which we need to be very clear about, again, Mr. Prashant alluded to it, there is no one-stop solution. It's going to be a multi-fuel, multi-use approach. And before we get into the fuel part of it, because discussions like this, I think it's very important to realize, we talk about decarbonization, we talk about green fuels, but the first part starts, as somebody said, the greenest of all fuels is the fuel which has not been consumed. So the most important part is design, whether it's an aircraft or whether it's a ship, to make sure that design is the most efficient. Because why I'm bringing that here is it would not be proper to talk on greening without addressing the basics, and that basics needs to be addressed. And this is, I think the world is very clearly aware of this. So what is called design features and energy saving devices, because it's a sure shot. Once that is there, then we are talking about the fuels. And when we are talking about fuels, largely, Mr. Prashant was talking about Maersk, and Maersk is one of the leading operators in the world. So the classical talk is about high sea shipping. So, but if I may crudely divide shipping into three segments: the high sea shipping, which is the merchant ships which carry cargoes across continents, across countries. Then what in India we call the coastal shipping, what in Europe people call the short sea shipping. So that's the second step, which is a little bit away from home kind of a thing. And the third segment is inland waterways and what is pretty close to land. All these three segments will need different approaches. Dr. Singh brought out we need liquids for fuels. That is for high sea shipping for sure. We need liquids. But for coastal and for inland waterways and near coastal, we could actually use other forms. That we could use gas in cryogenic or pressurized formats. In India, starting with the National Green Hydrogen Mission, which is not just about the maritime or the mobility space. It set the context for the whole of the country. And that context, as Dr. Rashmi mentioned, is aligned with our larger thought processes, the global goals and aspirations, which I'm not getting into here. But on the maritime side, again, there are skeptics who talk about there's only 3% of the world. So why are you focusing here? The answer is this 3% is heavily concentrated, and probably you can tap it, you can reduce it much more. The fruits are much more low hanging. There's yet another reason which we need to be again there's geopolitics. It is unlike land vehicles, where the vehicles pollute your own area. Ships and planes my planes or my ships pollute somebody else's nation. It's got that potential. And what we are seeing when we are talking about international regulations, we need to be clear. We would run into this problem time and again. We will run into clannish requirements. So countries may try to protect their turf in various forms. Sri Prashant alluded to a green fund kind of a thing being raised. There are fierce differences of opinions in that direction. While the International Maritime Organization, a body under the United Nations, takes the lead, and India, as a respected signatory, is duty bound to follow these rules. When you're looking at it clannish, there would be difference of opinion, and this is what would come in the way of creating all-pervading international regulations. And this would be the most important aspect to look at. This is actually for the international shipping when you're talking about. But closer home, when you're talking about coastal or inland waterways, the government of India can take your call, because then we are talking about what needs to happen within our country. I'm very happy to inform that the Ministry of Port Shipping and Waterways, aligned with MNRE and the larger thought process of the government of India, has taken very proactive steps. Within the National Hydrogen Mission, pilot projects are being run. So pilot projects are coming into operation. We have been part of the first hydrogen fuel cell vessel in the country. It's a small vessel, but the great part is end to end, it's an Indian product. The hydrogen fuel cell came from the industry. The industry had nothing to do with shipping. So we are actually setting the tone for interdisciplinary, inter-industry cooperation, without which we will not be able to work in this regard. Because at the end of the day, decarbonization of greening is not just coming from one segment. The Ministry of Port Shipping and Waterways has released the Harit Nauga project, which sets in initially 1,000 vessels in the coastal and the inland waterways over the next 10 years to be greened. It could be hybrid, it could be electric hybrid, could be methanol, ammonia into the future. It could also be hydrogen. So it's covering the entire value chain. Financial instruments under the shipbuilding financial assistance programs have been heightened to attract investments and participation in this area. So if green vessels, which could, again, as I said, could be hybrid electric, it could be methanol, ammonia, or hydrogen, these would get a special support from the government. Sri Rashmi is also involved in cooperation with the TERI. 3 ports and Cochin Shipyard, along with the Ministry of Port Shipping and Waterways, has supported the formation of a very strong institution within TERI, the National Center of Excellence for Green Ports and Shipping. And this Center of Excellence would be India's window to the rest of the world. Already a strong connect with Denmark, with Norway, and this is where the global participation would come in. States have been encouraged to come on board. And I come from a state, Kerala, which has actually driven the first largest fully electric, green electric water metro in the world. So the largest grouping of fully electric vessels is actually in a city, in a tier 2 city in India. It's not anywhere else in the world. And they're talking much more. And today, various other states in Assam, West Bengal, Maharashtra, they're all taking a leaf out of this. So teaming up is happening. Regulatory part, yes, IMO will take the lead. And for international shipping, classification societies from a technology perspective, which is already getting mature. For methanol, as the Laura Maersk is proven, Maersk is, as a company, has gone forward with all methanol vessels. So that is being proven. So from a technology perspective, I think the regulations are more or less there. Even as we are speaking, Cochin Shipyard is building a vessel with hydrogen fueled for an offshore wind energy segment. We struggle to get fire control systems which are fully meeting the requirements. So regulatory things will evolve on the technology side, but the challenges would be on the government part of it, which closer home, the government of India, the Director General of Shipping, the ministries, MNRE, rules and regulations are being framed. Internationally, we'll have to discuss wherever required. Maybe countries will fight a little bit, but at the end of the day, respectable solutions under the International Maritime Organization will emerge. So this is what I feel is a way forward. But for sure, hydrogen and hydrogen derivatives will be here to stay. I hasten to add, it doesn't mean that fossil fuel is going anywhere. Fossil fuel will be here for some time, at least a few decades. But then things like carbon capture and other things would also be coming in. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nair. You have more or less endorsed what Captain Widge had said, and that's a very good signal, because Government of India is taking a number of positive steps to promote green hydrogen. But as Mr. Nair has explained, there is a clear thinking that we need to separate the high sea shipping from the short sea shipping and the inland waterways, where the technologies can be different, and we can perhaps experiment with different also options there, and we should be prepared for all that scientific choice, and the ecosystem needs to be built for both of these things. We have Mr. Santiago LEIVA from the European Union here with us, and he brings an international perspective on this. He's from the European Aviation Authority, is it? So he's working actively in this field. So Sante, my question to you, of course, you are free to answer the way you like it, but we would like to know from you the EU perspective on the policy and industry response to use of green hydrogen in the aviation sector in particular, where you are working. And also to know if EU has come up with any specific certification, safety, or financing protocol for green hydrogen.
Thank you very much. And let me start saying thank you very much for the warming welcome that I'm receiving since I'm landed on Monday in New Delhi. And that's really, really nice being part of these discussions. The other day I was in the pre-meeting of the Ministerial Conference for Civil Aviation, where sustainable aviation was already on one of the panels. And there is very much, let's say, encouraging seeing the move from India towards sustainable economy. I may start as replying the question with another question. And in this case, the question will be to the group, to the colleagues around the table. Just may quickly raise your hand if you are an aviation people. You consider yourself an aviation people.
How many of you are from the aviation side?
Very good. I see only two hands, myself and another colleague, but in the room. That gives me, because I started with a bit of background, and I think it's worth to start with a bit of background for the sake of the understanding of the whole policy development in Europe and also the engagement with the European industry. So aviation, as it was mentioned, is one of the hard-to-abate sectors, and is for several reasons. First, is a very energy demanding mode of transport. It's a very high intensity mode of transport in terms of energy. It is very safety regulated, so the safety standards are very high, and with the atomic industry, with atomic nuclear industry, aviation is probably one of the safest in terms of standards. That has certain implications in the time or the meantime to bring from a design to the final production and the final delivery of an aviation product. So the A320, whatever the aircraft you have in mind, it takes from 10 to 15 years to be in the market. An airplane has a 20-25 minimum life of operations, and therefore to replace a product that is already in the market, unless we push, let's say, the usage of the aircraft, it will take another 25 years. So you have 15 plus 25, And all this is considering that technology is already well established. If you consider hydrogen, and I will go into replying the question immediately, hydrogen is not a technology that we know well. As it was already mentioned, there are safety concerns. In aviation, these safety concerns are critical. In the ship, okay, fire is a special case, but if the engine stops working, okay, you are floating, not good, but you are still safe. In aviation, if your engines are not working, believe me, it's a very, very safety concern, or high safety concern. It's also dependent on ground infrastructure. So that is similar to maritime. The way the hydrogen solutions will be deployed implies also modifying the infrastructure in the, on the ground. So for all these reasons, it is not something that you may expect, even if we know that is the long-term solution and the solution that will bring us to almost 100% reduction of emissions. It's not a solution that you may expect the industry going ahead on their own. Yeah, it's a bright solution, but it cannot happen unless all the actors together prepare and facilitate the deployment of this technology. First, understanding better the different possible pathways, and then developing the frameworks to enable these different pathways that will consider hydrogen as the future to be deployed. So now going back to your question, in the European Union, and I think this is something that you will see in the US in a similar way, and also it will something that with this kind of conference, you will see immediately popping. And indeed, India is a very good example of this coalition between not only government regulators, but also together with the industry and with the interested parties. We are analyzing the possible pathways and the different timelines for the different solutions coming through hydrogen. So the one that is really close to our, let's say, more midterm or close midterm, is using hydrogen as the energy carrier. So going to what Dr. Anil was mentioning, is using sustainable aviation fuels, using hydrogen with different processes, and here I will not go into details, using hydrogen to reduce the emissions from the fuel that we are using in the plane. The value of this approach is that the fuel is what we call drop-in, so there is no need to change the infrastructure, no need to change the engine or the fuel of the aircraft, the fuel system of the aircraft. That is obviously the best solution. There is no cost impact on the plane, on the certification of the plane. Other solutions would be related to, for example, hydrogen fuel cells. That is implying changing the type of engines that the aircraft will carry. And here we have the issue of the energy density necessary to fly or to bring the necessary power to an aircraft. Here we have some technological limitations. And then we have the last one, probably in the time scales, that is using hydrogen as the fuel. Obviously, for that, we need to rethink the plane, rethink the engine, and rethink the standards, the safety standards that will be necessary to bring these products into the market. For that, it's something that first you need the group of people, all the not only regulators, but the experts and the science carrying these developments forward, understanding what are the necessary requirements for the system to be deployed. So what the regulations or what the policymakers need to do is to facilitate all these possible solutions to be ready at the time when the learning of these new technologies are approaching to the commercial scale. So in the European Union, and I take the example as I'm coming from there, but I could take also the US example, there are policies in place to favor the production of sustainable aviation fuels, using hydrogen, so the so-called e-fuels or electric fuels are the ones that my colleague Dr. Anil was referring as power to liquid. And in this case, it's through mandate, it's creating a market. So the fuel suppliers will have the obligation to provide an amount of fuel in the European airports. And therefore, the producers already know that there will be a market waiting for their product to be there. So this is giving certainty to the investors to develop these products, knowing that the buyers will have, let's say, to buy this product from those airports. On the most futuristic pathways, both especially looking at the one in the future, it is absolutely necessary to bring all the parties together. So there are alliances in the European Union that are bringing not only the regulators or the policy makers, or the European Commission plus the European member states, they are also bringing the industry. And these are normally alliances that are industry-led, and it is putting together all the knowledge and drawing the roadmap, the action plan that will facilitate bringing all these new technologies in the market, and including, obviously, new regulations, new safety standards, the necessary changes in the infrastructure on the ground, the necessary research initiatives that need to complement the knowledge gaps that we are still having. So all this orchestration, it is, you may call it policy, you may call it coalitions, but are absolutely necessary to enable the potential of these solutions that are an absolute need to decarbonize aviation. I think I replied to your question, but if there is something that you want to make a bit more specific, please.
Something about the standards. Something about the standards, safe certifications. You of course refer to the industry alliances which are working on this, but if you can throw a little more light on that.
So one of the working groups of this alliance is called EZEA. This is the initiative that is defining the path and the roadmap in order to deliver the most challenging use of hydrogen. In one of the working groups is specifically focused to the safety standard that needs to be developed. And this is where the joint forces between industry and, in this case, EASA as a safety regulator is absolutely necessary. And it's also necessary to enable the research funds to reply to the necessary questions that this development of standards will start putting on the table. I think they were mentioning the risk of fire. So this is one of the biggest concerns. Imagine in an aircraft, the dynamics of an aircraft landing, taking off, affected turbulence, all this happening in the air, 30,000 feet above the ground. That has to be safely regulated and making sure that the safety standards are respected. There is, in this case, it is not a European Union initiative. It is something that requires global consensus on the standards. The planes will fly all around the world. They will land here, they will land in the US, and the safety standards have to be recognized by all the parties. Indeed, all these coalitions are coordinated and they are working together, uniting not only the European Union, but also the US and some other countries that want to be part of the discussion. So this is also an invitation for the Indian industry, looking at what are the possibilities to engage with these coalitions, with this initiative, and making sure that you are also bringing your developments on these greater developments in the country.
Thank you very much. I had a question on the civil aviation regulation, but I'll come back to you on this after we hear the other panelists. Mr. Sourabh Mukherjee from the Tata projects. For you, I mean, for the Tatas, how does the aviation sector in India look like? And specifically with reference to green hydrogen as a fuel choice. And are there any challenges from your perspective to its adoption or the electrofuels for the aviation sector as a whole? And what are your plans in this regard?
Yeah, thanks. First of all, it's a privilege to be part of such a august discussion, and being the last speaker, almost majority of the things that he wanted to say are already touched upon. Before I get to where Tata's look at SAF, I would be a little more generic around how India is looking at SAF. It's always great to have a conference of this scale specific on green hydrogen. And you would have topics that's covering almost every aspects and every sector. But I personally feel that green hydrogen is not meant for every sector. For India, I think our priorities today is electrification. You green the grid, electrify, make it round the clock. And then there would be sectors where green hydrogen would be required. And one of them is aviation. So, Professor Sinha touched upon it that and only 95%, 5% of your aviation fuel needs can be electrified. Rest have to be through molecules. And that's why green hydrogen comes in. Now, is it a priority for India as of today? We absolutely should start talking about it, but I think Prashant touched upon it. See, hydrogen is expensive. So when you're pumping in hydrogen and making SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, whether it's from biogenic sources or through electrolysis, it's going to be more expensive than fossil fuel. It's a very, very competitive industry. I mean, sometimes we feel why people actually are in the aviation industry, because you keep seeing people losing money and then companies burn out. In that situation, we have around, last year we had around 3.9 gigatons was our CO2 footprint, and around 13% of it was in mobility. So we are addressing a large part of it. We're doing great in electrification of for the two-wheelers, three-wheelers. We're moving to electrification of four-wheelers. I believe at this point of time, the priorities of the governments are a little bit where SAF does not really come up, because compared to the rest of the world percentage, although it's one of the fastest growing among the demands, but at a very small base. So SAF mandates are probably not really going to come. We expected it to come. It hasn't yet come. But that never stopped CSR IIPs to develop technologies which, based on my previous experience, I feel is as good as any of the global technologies. For Air India, Tata's, we got it, right? Vistara will also be called Air India. The challenge is not about securing the domestic markets. I think something that Mr. Rashmi was asking Santiago was the EU norms, right? The Fit for 55 today mandates that you start building up your green component into your aviation fuel of 25 onwards. As you lift up, you need to fill up at least 90% from the airports from where you are taking off. And the aspirations of Air India is to be that one airlines that's connecting India to the rest of the world. So how do you address that? At this point, probably production of SAF in India does not make a lot of money or value. But as a Tata group, you know, we have I hope I'm not overstretching the time. So we are sitting with a lot of CO2. Tata Steel has a scope 1 emissions around 58 million tons. Tata Power has 23 million tons. And so here you're sitting with a lot of CO2, you need to do something about it. And on the other end, you have Air India, which is crying for some source of SAF. And we started looking at various pathways. What we found out was when you take CO2, capture it, that's pretty expensive. Convert it to methanol, still not a high TRL. And then pump in hydrogen. And then from that route, you take straight to SAF production. It's workable. I know some of the TRL levels are not there, but I come from that industry. It will come up, but at the cost at which you finally produce, even with the European penalties, you would struggle to even be competitive there. So biogenic source of hydrogen, where you are not pumping in hydrogen, you're looking at the carbon that's sitting out there. I agree. The abatement is 80%. It's not 100%, but at least HEFA is very, very, very economical. If you really look at the way HEFA is come up in when the California rules came in, then into Europe, I think that's very much a way looking forward. But of course, the feedstock challenges remain. Other than that, I think we believe power to liquid, expensive. I think the certifications and all as it comes in from STM will help. Those are routes. Biomethanol has a lot of potential in India. And eventually, when we will be able to get to that sweet spot of the hydrogen price, which is the elephant in the room, everybody knows the power costs have to come down, electrolyzer costs have to come down. We will eventually have a route where we are actually abating 100%. You're taking in CO2, you're solving the problems of the Tata Steels of the world, you're able to produce hydrogen at some price, and with certain regulatory mandates, we will be getting there. So that's where we are as a group. Yeah, but can take any question further on that in the next round.
Thank you, Mr. Mukherjee. With this, we have come to the end of the intervention as far as the panelists are concerned. I'm sure there would be questions, although the organizers have not budgeted any question and answer session in this session. But I, as moderator, I think I consider it my privilege to, since we have some time left, to invite a few questions, taking advantage of their presence here. So, yeah, the lady here first, because she raised her hand first. Yes. Kindly introduce yourself and direct the question to the panelist.
So I'm Dr. Sudeshna. I'm working in hydrogen storage R&D at Shri Ram Institute for Industrial Research, Gurgaon. So I've very interesting session and a lot of very interesting points were discussed. My specific question is regarding the amount of hydrogen required for a small size ship. Like say, Madhu sir has very clearly pointed out that for inland shipping, coastal shipping, we can look at hydrogen as a fuel. So for that scale, what is the minimum size of the tank? For hydrogen, how many kgs of hydrogen is required? For methanol, how many kgs? And or maybe you could say, give me a figure on the calorific value of the fuel equivalent.
See, the vessel which we have built, it's a small fuel cell vessel, 50 kilowatt was the fuel cell. So that vessel, it needs about 40 kilograms of hydrogen, 99 point, that purity, 99999% purity, to do 8 hours. So 8 hours, 50 kilowatt, 40 kilograms. We store this at, the tanks are for 350 bar, but we have actually stored it at 220 kind of a thing. This changes because we will continue to press for 700 bar, which is what China has actually done. So 700 bar we'll push for. But right now 350 bar is a sizing. And we are storing it in 5 tanks, and these tanks, the sizing, I don't have the exact dimensions, but it's something like about a 40 centimeter diameter. And these tanks are similar to the tanks which can go on top of a truck, because we are trying to the road segment where hydrogen, when it actually comes, and I am a strong believer in that, what Mr. Mukherjee was telling, there is a price. We are all waiting for that elephant in the room, but then we feel the price will come to a certain level, and then long haul trucks will become viable. The same will happen for coastal or ferry kind of vessels. But then you need a few vessels together. So what we are trying to do now is Varanasi, 5 vessels together. But even 5 vessels is what you want to run it 8 hours or 10 hours, then you're talking only 200 kilograms. But if you have another 10 buses also, then the viability comes in. And this is what is being discussed now. So the Ministry of Ports is also talking to the Ministry of Roads, and we are trying to see whether we can create an ecosystem where roughly about 1,000 kilograms, a ton a day kind of a system can be created. The electrolyzer can be created at source, because you can't really make that hydrogen, transport it. I think then it's all becoming unworkable. So this is where we are. Coming to methanol, you can take diesel divided by 2.2, something like that. Yeah.
Yes, sir, there. Yes, it's on.
Sir, good evening, sir. Captain Rajesh Wadhwa, Navy veteran, sir. So my question is to Mr. Madhu Nair, Kochi Shipyard, sir. Sir, are you planning, can liquid hydrogen also be used for warships, considering that some of them need high agility and all. So is hydrogen something which just goes on slowly, steadily and cannot take accelerations and all? And besides, for larger warships like you made the aircraft carrier in future, would there be any such plans?
My initial answer would be it may not be the most preferred one, but the Indian Navy has already sent in a request for small ferries. They are looking at 3 vessels to probably understand how hydrogen works for them. But from a larger perspective, because a vessel which is out to going for war, you probably wouldn't want to carry pressurized tanks which could take a bullet. That would be one reason, but the Navy is definitely looking at auxiliary vessels and hydrogen, because from a naval perspective also, they also need to align with the best in class. They don't want to be polluters. So that is true.
Thanks.
Yes, gentleman at the back. Maybe just one more question and that's then, yes.
What about blending? Please talk about blending. Is there any possibility that carry a blended unit? It can work as dual fuel.
Would somebody like to, Dr. Sinha, would you like to take a question?
Yeah, for blending of hydrogen, you mean, or blending of any fuel with fossil fuel? Yeah, blending of hydrogen as such, like you need 2 engines for that. Probably no one would be thinking of that angle. But blending of different fuel like fossil fuel along with your biogenic source fuel, you can blend in different ratios using the same engine. So issue is with hydrogen, if you think of blending maybe for CNG engines, especially for road transport and all, people are looking into that option. But I'm not sure for shipping or even for aviation that would work. But maybe for road sector, it will surely work. Yeah, for road transport, obviously. For shipping, I'm not sure, but yeah, it will work in the same way. But considering that if you are considering like hydrogen with LNG or compressed natural gas, so probably it is possibility to use those 2 kind of fuels in there. Yeah.
I can just take a small 15 seconds. See, hydrogen is a fuel. When it's blended, has to be in a gaseous state. For both shipping and liquid, you're carrying, especially in the high seas, you need it's not volumetrically possible to carry a lot of liquid, right? So you're either carrying in liquid form, whichever it is, or we are talking of ammonia as solids. If you now want to liquefy hydrogen, that you are now looking at a lot of complications. So I don't think blending per se can work here, as long as it's CNGs and others. There are other applications where you will be adding, the best for use is you put 5% in your PNGs that come to your home. Yeah.
If I understand your question correctly, it's more about shipping, exporting.
Please use the
Correct.
microphone.
Yeah, are the ports are equipped and the vessels are ready to export the green ammonia or the green hydrogen for exporting?
Yes, that is correct. So today we have a global fleet of tanker vessels that is actually carrying some of these fuels as cargo in tanker vessels. And that is something which India, as it starts to build up, there's also a potential for exporting green fuels, so methanol, ammonia, bio LNG to the rest of the world, and could actually be where it could be shipped from here to a Singapore, which is nothing but an aggregator of fuels for the shipping and industry, right? Similarly, so that's something which is very much possible.
Including green hydrogen? Transporting green hydrogen is also possible?
Transporting green
hydrogen as a gas, green hydrogen gas.
And there, I think there's yet to be a use case. I know that there are some pilots happening at the moment, but it's something where there has to be a use case to that level where shipping could actually then use it. At this point in time, I'm not aware of something in that context.
And about the large methanol.
I think we have to give an opportunity to others as well. And I had a question myself to Mr. Santiago LEIVA. I am aware that aviation is part of the European trading system, ETS. So what implications does it have for other countries which are partner in the ETS or outside the ETS? Are there any regulatory impact of EU or the impact of EU's regulations on other countries like India?
So on trading and so I'm not familiar. I don't think there is. On the specific aviation regulations, and I'm going back to the Refuel EU regulation, so this regulation to promote sustainable aviation fuels, yes, together with the use of sustainable aviation fuel, regardless if it's with hydrogen or directly from biomass, there will be allowances for the operators, for the airplane operators landing in the European Union, to reduce or to use them to offset the ETS corresponding to those flights. So in a way, is decarbonizing and acknowledging the use of sustainable aviation fuels to reduce the emissions that these flights are causing. And it would be a way of claiming those environmental benefits under the existing scheme.
But does it mean any particular standards or protocols to be adopted by the partner countries?
No, because in this case, it will be fuel that the airplanes are uplifting in airports of the European Union, which by definition will be compliant with the standards applicable for the European Union, which are also compatible with the global standards, with the ICAO in the International Civil Aviation Organization standards.
Okay. So I think we have to bring it to a close now because we have finished our budgeted time. With this, let me thank all the panelists here for their excellent inputs and contribution to the discussion today. We have had an extremely rich discussion, and by and large, it's quite clear that while we are supporting the uptake of green hydrogen in the energy system, it's relevant for some particular sectors at this moment, particularly hard to abate sectors like aviation and shipping. But all possible options need to be exercised because most of the speakers have talked about different technology routes, and depending on which one of them is taken up by the market or by the users, we have to look at all possible options. And all of them have talked about synthetic fuels, the liquid fuels as a possible solution. But the challenge is, of course, to make it commercially viable and economically feasible as quickly as possible. And that obviously needs some help from the regulators, from the policymakers. So thank you very much for being patiently listening to us. And with this, let's give them a big hand. Thank you.
Our gratitude abound to the applauded panel for such a sagacious session of deliberations. Just taking a moment to extend our token of gratitude and appreciation. May I please request you, sir, Mr. Vijay Bharti, Scientist D from MNRE, to kindly do the honors of felicitating the esteemed session moderator, Mr. R. Rashmi, for his pearls of wisdom. A token of gratitude. Thank you, sir. And may I now please invite Dr. Payali Das, the Associate Director at the Energy and Resources Institute, to kindly do the honors of felicitating the eminent panelists. And just for the interest of the space there, if we may go by the extreme left for me, for the best interest of space, our sincere gratitude to Dr. Anil Sinha, the eminent panelists who made more edifying this session of deliberations. Mr. Sourabh Mukherjee, Felicitations to Mr. Santiago. Felicitations to Mr. Madhu S. Nair. And felicitations to Captain Prashant Widge. Ladies and gentlemen, and now join me in raising the sound, a thunderous one, as we extend our sincere gratitude to the distinguished members for this session for steering such a sagacious session. Thank you very much. We shall be commencing with the last session of deliberations in this hall right away. However, we will request you to please allow us 2 minutes so that we can just prepare the deck for the next panel.
There's a trip hazard.
So after this forceful landing, we shall now be entering the domain of oil refineries and city gas distribution.
Thank you.
Another 2 minutes and we bring to you the formal proceedings for the session. 3D, green hydrogen, a viable clean option for oil refineries and city gas distribution. Thank you.